Good day. I'm holding a checkbook from my previous bank, that is the Jewel Bank of Zimbabwe. And I last signed a checkbook on the 23rd of December 2004. The amount I signed for was $1.2 million. You know, think of that huge figure. I think by now, you know, I should be sitting pretty, but that is not the case. Those who were born, you know, from 2000 onwards, most of them probably have never seen a checkbook, and or they've never used a check as a form of payment, you know, settling their bills or any other debts that they have. So what happened? Due to the hyperinflation that Zimbabwe experienced from 2000 or 1997, when ZANU-PF paid the war veterans gratuities to the tune of 50,000, the Zimbabwe dollar nosedived. It lost value at an exponential rate, and as a result, by 2004, 2005, 2007, 2008, you know, it became impossible to write some of the figures on this small space. You know, imagine writing 10 trillion, 1,590,000,050 $50, you know, on this space. It became impossible, and also money was no longer found in banks. You had to get money from the black market, because even banks were now having their agents on the streets selling money and trying to find the United States dollar in order for them to survive. So that's how the checkbook eventually left the Zimbabwe money market. And that is where Tulimuve wants to take us, when he made a sudden and surprise announcement that henceforth the government is going to start paying its suppliers and contractors in the Zimbabwe ZiG, which is the local currency. You know, it came as a surprise to everybody, you know, and then a day or so later, the Reserve Bank of Zimbabwe had to issue a statement to the effect that you know, they try to, you know, calm the market, the money market, allaying fears of hyperinflation and the resuscitation of the black market. But you know, all that is inevitable after the pronunciation by Tulimuve. You know, what is also of concern is that you know, this comes on the backdrop of the International Monetary Fund, the IMF, having visited Zimbabwe at meetings with the Minister of Finance, and gave a very favorable report on the progress that is being made by Zimbabwe. And they made certain recommendations, you know, and also prior to that, the Reserve Bank governor he had also issued a statement to the effect that the de-dollarization, which Mtulini is talking about, deadline of 2030, had been removed. It was no longer the target, but economic fundamentals were going to deal with that, and then at the right time, the de-dollarization would come into effect. But Mtulini had his own plans. He made this crucial announcement immediately after coming from the SADC ministers meeting, which was held in Pretoria from the 12th to the 13th of March, focusing, on economic development, integration, and regional integration. Primarily, the economy of the region was under the spotlight. They were also going to look at some of the protocols that they had put in place or agreed upon from 2000 to the current period. However, that part of the agenda was not attended to, as we could learn from the Minister of International Relations, Mr. Lamola, when he said that there's going to be another ministers' meeting in May to particularly dwell on the protocols. And the Zimbabwe delegation was led by Mtulini instead of the Minister of Foreign Affairs. And that was one, very predictable and deliberate on the part of the ZANU-PF government. They knew that among the SADC protocols which were going to be discussed was the 2023 CIOM report, and they needed to buy time, which obviously they got when Lamola announced that they're going to have another meeting in May. That was very crucial for ZANU-PF in terms of the current dispute with regards to the unconstitutional amendments of the constitution, which the Mnangagwa regime is trying to impose on the people of Zimbabwe. Let me, elaborate. So, between now and May, Mtulini is busy printing money. The Fidelity printers, which is the Zimbabwe Mint, they are currently working overtime, printing the local currency. They need the money to organize massive demonstrations where they are going to invite people from the entire country into Harare, into Bulawayo, into Gweru, into Mutare, all these major cities, as a show of power. And for them, they want to use that as a substitute for the referendum which Zimbabweans are demanding. So that when they meet in May with the other SADC ministers, they will say, look, this is what the people of Zimbabwe are saying. Look at the massive numbers that were part of the pro-amendment demonstrations. That is where the whole, de-dollarization, the printing of the ZiG, and the delay that they got from the SADC ministers, where they pushed back the discussion on SADC protocols, avoiding the discussion on the COM report, so that when they meet again and they'll be able to showcase, the videos of Zimbabweans in the streets of Harare, who will be demonstrating in support of the unconstitutional amendments, because they need money. I think if you look at the videos that were coming out when Jacob Mudenda was going around the provinces, talking to the provincial executives, you could see that he was, talking to people who were in a state of depression, people who were hungry. And these are ZANU-PF provincial leaders. That reminds me of the cliche, Tatsikwane province. The provincial executive, it's a very powerful and high-ranking executive within the ZANU-PF. But when you see those people, looking so hungry and not well dressed, you begin to see that things are not well. And Mudenda had to go and see for himself. Mind you, Mudenda is the Speaker of Parliament, who is going to preside over the amendments. He is certainly a shameless person who does not care about the welfare of his own party members. And having realized that his party members are hungry and there's no money to fund these demonstrations, that's why they've asked Mtulingwe to start printing money. So that's the challenge that we have. And then we have other organizations which have come up who are fighting this unconstitutional amendment to the Constitution. They don't have resources. They are asking people to sign petitions. The people who do not have free Wi-Fi, who do not have data, they're supposed to go on the internet and sign these petitions, and they are planning to organize demonstrations. They don't have the funds to match the ZANU-PF. So, as far as demonstrations, petitions, and everything that we might think of in terms of fighting these unconstitutional amendments, those who are opposed to the amendments are blindly walking into the ZANU-PF trap, because there are chances that you might not get the 1 million signatures. There are chances that your demonstrations will flop. They'll be squatted by the police and other security agents in one way or the other, like we witnessed with Geza when he tried to mobilize people to go into the streets and demonstrate. That did not work out, because what did Mnangagwa do? He paid the vendors to say, for on that particular day, stay home, I'll compensate you, and people stayed home. No one went out to demonstrate. Therefore, we are appealing again to the SADC leadership that they must deal with this Zimbabwe constitutional crisis now, because Mnangagwa is prepared to go down with the entire region. Once we experience hyperinflation in Zimbabwe, that will not spare the rest of the region. At a time when the world is in turmoil, we would not expect anyone in this region to make any moves that will destabilize the economies. Mnangagwa knows that at this time he cannot use the fist and the claws, because the world is watching for any repressive governments, but he will try to use a softer approach, which is buying people. He is going to go and buy demonstrators to go into the streets of Harare, Bulawayo, Gweru, and he will say, look, the people of Zimbabwe are pro amendments, and that is the referendum that he wants to present to the other SADC leaders who might be putting pressure on him. So how then do we move forward? I think the best we can do is to persuade our own relatives not to be hoodwinked, not to be bought by the regime, and avoid participating in any pro amendment demonstrations. That is the best way we can do for now. And we must tell the regime that we know your tricks, we know your tactics, your evil tactics that you want to implement. And please don't destroy our economy, which is already at the bottom, which has already hit rock bottom. That's where the Zimbabwean economy is now. And that is what we can do. Let us persuade our own people. Let us use that soft tactic of persuading our own people and tell them the truth, that immediately after the demonstrations, Mtulingove is going to resort back to the US dollar. For instance, just yesterday, a few days ago, Mtulingove came out saying he's going to compensate those businesses which would be affected by the sudden change in policy. And we know whose businesses they are. They are Mnangagwa, his children, and Chigananda. So already there are plans which have been put in place to compensate every business which is going to be paid in the ZiG. And they will remain unaffected, but the general people who would have sacrificed their time, their life to go for a demonstration to get a chicken piece, or to get a ride on the bus, they will lose and lose forever. So it is incumbent upon each and every Zimbabwean to persuade our very own relatives to say, zvezano hachichada, zveamendment iyi hatide kuzvinzwa. That is my appeal. Thank you.